October 14th, 1066. A chill mist hangs over Senlac Hill near Hastings. Two armies face each other, one defending a kingdom, the other claiming a promise. By sunset, England will no longer belong to the English. In the year 1066, England trembled between past and future. King Edward the Confessor was dead, leaving no heir, only rivals. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in the realm, took the crown with the blessing of the Witan, England's Council of Nobles. But across the Channel, Duke William of Normandy swore that Edward had promised the throne to him, and that Harold had once sworn an oath of loyalty upon sacred relics. In the north, another shadow moved. Harald Hardrada of Norway, last great Viking king, seeking to reclaim England's Old Norse inheritance. The island was a prize all three men believed destiny had marked for them. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle speaks of comets blazing across the sky that spring, and of men who feared what they meant. Most historians now see those omens as symbols of a world about to change, a land poised between its ancient ways and a new foreign order. This is not only the story of a battle, but of transformation, of faith tested, power challenged, and history rewritten. Welcome to Past Frame, where real history meets courage, faith, and truth. England before 1066 was a kingdom of stability on the surface, but fragility beneath. After centuries of Viking raids, the realm had finally achieved peace under King Edward the Confessor, who reigned from 1042 to 1066. Edward was pious and cautious, more monk than monarch, ruling through compromise rather than strength. His long exile in Normandy during his youth had shaped his mind and his loyalties. The Norman court, disciplined and devout, contrasted sharply with the proud independence of Anglo-Saxon England. When Edward returned to rule, he brought Norman advisors and clerics with him, quietly planting seeds of foreign influence that would later divide his kingdom. But Edward's greatest failure was not his governance, it was his succession. The king had no children. As he grew older, rival claims began to form around him. Among these was Duke William of Normandy, who believed Edward had promised him the English crown years earlier. The Norman claim rested partly on Edward's gratitude. During his exile, he had lived under Norman protection. Some chroniclers even suggest that Norman knights and clerics had helped him reclaim the throne from Danish rule. Whether Edward ever formally designated William as his heir remains uncertain, but William would later swear that it was a promise sealed by God and honor. Meanwhile, in England, another figure rose to prominence. Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex. Harold was not of royal blood, but he was the most powerful nobleman in England. His family controlled vast lands, his fleets guarded the southern coast, and his political influence reached into every corner of the realm. When Edward's health declined, Harold effectively ruled in his stead. Many English nobles saw him as the natural successor, native, capable, and beloved by his army. Yet his growing power alarmed Edward, whose Norman sympathies only deepened the mistrust between English and Norman factions. One moment of fateful controversy defined Harold's destiny. Around 1064, Harold was shipwrecked off the coast of Normandy and taken to Duke William's court. There, according to the Bayeux Tapestry, Harold swore an oath to support William's claim to the English throne, an oath taken over sacred relics. Historians still debate the nature of this vow. Norman chroniclers insist it was solemn and binding, while English sources later portrayed it as coerced or misunderstood. Most modern scholars agree that Harold likely made some form of political pledge under duress, never imagining it would later be used as the justification for invasion. The Church, too, played a quiet but decisive role in this crisis. Pope Alexander II would later bless William's campaign, framing it as a holy mission to reform and stabilize England's church and governance. This papal endorsement gave the Norman invasion a moral dimension it might otherwise have lacked. For William, it transformed his conquest from personal ambition into divine duty, a message that would resonate deeply in a world where victory and faith were inseparable. While tensions brewed in the south, another storm gathered in the north. Harald Hardrada, the formidable king of Norway, saw himself as the rightful heir to the old Viking claims over England. Supported by Harold Godwinson's exiled brother Tostig, he planned a massive invasion of his own. Thus, by the spring of 1066, England faced threats from two directions: a Viking armada from Norway, and a Norman fleet across the Channel. The island stood isolated, its fate tied to a dying king's silence. When Edward the Confessor finally died on January 5, 1066, the fragile balance shattered. The next day, Harold was crowned King of England by the Archbishop of York, bypassing Norman sympathizers in the church. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that a great joy arose over all England. But across the sea in Normandy, joy turned to fury. Duke William declared Harold's coronation a betrayal of oath and blood. For him, it was not just treason, it was blasphemy. The storm had broken. England's destiny now marched toward Hastings. They thought the crown would bring peace. Instead, it summoned war. The Battle of Hastings was more than a clash of men. It was a collision of systems, technologies, and leadership philosophies. On one side stood King Harold II of England, last of the Anglo-Saxon rulers, leading a force rooted in tradition, loyalty, and the shield wall. On the other, Duke William of Normandy, commander of a disciplined, multi-weapon army, whose tactics and organization reflected the new face of medieval warfare. Their confrontation was not only a test of courage, but of ideas. Old England against continental modernity. Harold Godwinson was no stranger to war. As Earl of Wessex, he had fought Norse raiders, Welsh princes, and rebellious nobles for decades. His army was built upon the fyrd, the national levy of free men who owed military service to the crown. Most were farmers, summoned for short campaigns, armed with spears, axes, and wooden shields. At their heart stood Harold's elite housecarls, professional soldiers wielding heavy two-handed axes and wearing mail hauberks. They fought in dense formations known as the shield wall, a defensive tactic that had served the Anglo-Saxons since the age of Alfred the Great. Their discipline and cohesion were legendary. If unbroken, they could repel even the fiercest cavalry charge. Yet Harold's strength was also his limitation. The English army fought almost entirely on foot. They lacked the archers, mounted knights, and combined arms that defined continental warfare. Communication in battle relied on horns and banners, and the army's endurance depended on morale as much as logistics. They had marched hundreds of miles in weeks, and though fierce in spirit, they were weary. Still, Harold's men trusted their king. He was one of them, born in England, speaking their tongue, sharing their gods and fears. Across the Channel, Duke William's army represented a different world. The Normans were descendants of Vikings who had settled in France generations earlier. Through time, they had blended Norse ferocity with Frankish discipline and feudal hierarchy. Their army was professional, methodical, and diverse. Cavalry formed its core, knights in chainmail with kite-shaped shields, trained to maneuver in disciplined ranks. They fought alongside archers and crossbowmen, supported by infantry carrying spears and swords. This blend of arms allowed for dynamic tactics: attack, feigned retreat, and sudden encirclement. William himself was a product of both ruthlessness and order. Born illegitimate, he fought from youth to claim and keep his title as Duke of Normandy. His leadership combined charisma with fear, faith with calculation. Chroniclers like William of Poitiers described him as a man of iron will, capable of inspiring devotion and terror alike. Before sailing to England, he gathered a coalition of Norman, Breton, and Flemish lords, offering land and honor in exchange for service. He secured papal blessing from Pope Alexander II, who sent him a consecrated banner, an act that cast his invasion as a holy enterprise rather than a political gamble. The contrast between the two commanders extended to their organization. Harold's power rested on loyalty and regional unity, while William's rested on feudal bonds and contractual obligation. Harold's men fought for home and kin, William's for faith, fortune, and fealty. The English army's logistics were local and improvised, dependent on nearby resources. The Norman force, by contrast, was meticulously supplied through the port of Divry-sur-Mer, then Saint-Valery, with a fleet of hundreds of ships built for transport and speed. Terrain, too, would favor William's method. The rolling hills near Hastings provided room for cavalry maneuvers, while Harold's shield wall relied on the strength of high ground. But no leader could choose both terrain and timing. Harold, fresh from a desperate victory in the north against Hardrada, was forced to rush south, arriving exhausted. William had rested, scouted, and fortified his landing. Fate, it seemed, was already tilting toward Normandy. Before the battle, each commander appealed to his men in ways that revealed their character. Harold reportedly swore that he would defend England as long as breath remained, while William promised his soldiers land, wealth, and divine favor. Chroniclers wrote that both armies prayed that night, but not to the same God. To the English, God defended home and hearth. To the Normans, he rewarded justice and oath. The dawn of October 14th would decide which prayer heaven heard. In the early months of 1066, England became a kingdom under siege by destiny itself. When King Harold II took the crown in January, he inherited not peace, but a chain of crises stretching across the North Sea and the Channel. Every coast carried rumors of invasion. Yet Harold could not be everywhere at once. His first challenge came not from Normandy, but from Norway. Harold Hardrada, the seasoned Viking king, landed in northern England in September with a massive fleet, around 300 ships, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Beside him rode Tostig Godwinson, Harold's exiled brother, seeking revenge against his own kin. They crushed the local forces at Fulford Gate near York on the 20th of September, a defeat that threatened to tear England apart before William's fleet had even sailed. Harold's response was astonishing. Marching nearly 190 miles from London to York in just 4 days, his army struck the invaders by surprise at Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September. The result was a decisive English victory. Hardrada and Tostig were both killed, and the Norse threat extinguished. But victory came at a cost. Harold's army was bloodied, exhausted, and far from the southern coast. The men had barely set down their weapons when messengers arrived with news that chilled every heart. The Normans had landed. Across the Channel, Duke William of Normandy had spent months preparing. His invasion was delayed by unfavorable winds that kept his fleet stranded at Saint-Valery-sur-Somme. For weeks, his men waited, praying and training, while Harold's scouts patrolled England's southern shore. Some chroniclers suggest Harold even dismissed part of his army and navy in late September, believing the season of invasion had passed. Then, at last, the winds turned. On 28 September 1066, William's fleet of hundreds of ships crossed the Channel and landed unopposed at Pevensey Bay. His army quickly built a wooden fort and began raiding local villages for supplies. The speed and precision of his operation shocked the English. Norman cavalry, archers, and infantry established control of the region within days. William moved to Hastings, where he built another fort and prepared for Harold's inevitable advance. Harold now faced an agonizing decision. His army, though victorious in the north, was weary and scattered. His nobles urged caution, wait, gather reinforcements, fortify London. But Harold feared delay would invite rebellion or desertion. Determined to defend his throne personally, he ordered an immediate march south. Within a week, the same soldiers who had fought at Stamford Bridge were trudging toward Hastings, armor dented, feet bleeding, but spirits unbroken. As Harold advanced, he chose to hold the high ground at Senlac Hill, a ridge near Hastings overlooking the Norman positions. It was a natural defensive site: steep slopes, narrow approaches, and wooded flanks that limited cavalry maneuvers. There, he drew up his lines and rebuilt his legendary shield wall. His plan was simple: endure the Norman assault until their attacks broke, then counterstrike. William, in turn, relied on reconnaissance and careful coordination. His scouts mapped the English position. His archers and cavalry drilled relentlessly. On the night before battle, both camps prayed. Harold's men around simple fires, William's under the papal banner blessed in Rome. Both leaders knew the next dawn would decide far more than a crown. The armies had marched through exhaustion, through storm and oath. Now at Hastings, destiny waited on the hill. Dawn broke on the 14th of October, 1066, under a pale autumn sky. The fields near Hastings were still wet with dew as both armies formed for battle. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that Harold's men took position on the ridge of Senlac Hill, their shields overlapping in a solid wall of oak and iron. Below, on the slopes and plains, William's army assembled in 3 divisions: Breton on the left, Norman in the center, Flemish on the right, each flying its own banners and led by its own captains. At the center rose the papal standard sent from Rome, symbol of divine sanction. The stage was set for one of the most decisive encounters in European history. The opening phase began with the sound of Norman horns. Archers stepped forward, loosing volleys of arrows into the mist. The arrows thudded harmlessly against the English shields, thick, round, and overlapping. Harold's men stood firm, shouting the war cry, "God Almighty, shield us today," as their axes and spears glinted in the morning light. The English defense held, unmoving, disciplined. For an hour, wave after wave of Norman infantry attacked uphill, only to be beaten back by the relentless wall of shields. Realizing direct assaults were failing, William ordered his cavalry forward. Mounted knights surged up the slope, lances lowered. But the ground was treacherous, muddy and uneven. Horses stumbled, riders fell. The English housecarls struck hard, their axes cleaving through shields and armor. The Norman left flank wavered, and a rumor swept the field that William himself had been killed. Panic rippled through his army. The Breton troops began to retreat. Sensing victory, parts of Harold's line broke discipline and charged downhill in pursuit. That moment changed the battle. William, alive and furious, lifted his helmet for all to see, shouting, "Look at me! I live, and by God's help I shall conquer." Rallying his men, he turned retreat into ambush. As the pursuing English rushed forward, the Norman cavalry wheeled around and cut them down on the open slope. This feigned retreat, one of the most famous maneuvers in medieval warfare, broke the English formation for the first time. By midday, the battlefield was a chaos of smoke, shouting, and broken armor. Norman archers adjusted their fire, angling arrows high over the shield wall. Some accounts, including the Bayeux Tapestry, depict one arrow striking King Harold in the eye, though modern historians debate this. Others suggest he was cut down by Norman knights in the final melee. Whatever the manner, Harold's death was the turning point. When their king fell, the English resistance began to collapse. Still, the fight raged on. Harold's brothers, Leofwine and Gurth, were killed beside him. The housecarls formed a desperate last circle around the fallen banner of Wessex, holding the line until sunset. Chroniclers describe the ground running red with rain and clay, though modern historians avoid exaggeration. The truth was grim enough. As the shield wall finally broke, Norman knights poured through, surrounding the remnants of Harold's army. The hill that had promised defense now became a trap. As night fell, the surviving English scattered into the woods. William's army, though bloodied, held the field. Fires were lit, prayers said, and the papal banner raised in triumph. The Normans had won not through numbers alone, but through adaptability, discipline, and the steady hand of their commander. The Bayeux Tapestry later depicted the scene with a single caption, "Hic Harold Rex interfectus est." Here, King Harold is killed. Yet even in victory, the field was silent. Thousands lay dead, both Norman and English. The old world of the Saxons had ended in a single day. In its place rose something entirely new, a fusion of French, Norse, and English traditions that would reshape law, language, and kingship for centuries to come. The sun set over Hastings, not on triumph, but on transformation. As dusk fell over Senlac Hill, victory belonged to the Normans. But the true conquest had only begun. The Anglo-Saxons had fought bravely, yet their static shield wall could not withstand the coordinated strikes of Norman archers, infantry, and cavalry. Collapse came in waves, first the flanks, then the center, until only a few warriors stood around the fallen banner of Wessex. With Harold dead, command disintegrated. The once solid English line dissolved into retreat, chased through woods and marshes by Norman horsemen. Chroniclers wrote of slaughter, though modern historians see it as tactical pursuit. William had won the field, but not the kingdom. That night, the Norman camp was silent and weary. Thousands lay dead, perhaps 2,000 Normans, and twice as many English. William ordered prayers, knowing his hardest task was ahead, ruling a hostile land without its king. In London, nobles tried to crown young Edgar Atheling, but his weakness ended their cause. William advanced cautiously, securing towns and supply lines. By December, resistance crumbled. On Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey, he was crowned King of England beneath the papal banner. Yet even then, fires broke out in panic. England bowed, but not in peace. Hastings ended more than a reign. It ended an era. Anglo-Saxon freedom gave way to Norman feudalism. Castles replaced halls, French blended into English, and the church turned toward Rome. Rebellions flared for years, but the new order held firm. Most historians agree. The true turning point of Hastings was not Harold's death, but the birth of a New England. The battle ended in one day, but the conquest remade a nation forever. The morning after Hastings, England woke to silence and to foreign banners on its soil. The battle had ended, but the transformation it triggered had only begun. With Harold dead and his nobles scattered, Duke William moved swiftly to consolidate power. Marching through Kent and Surrey, he accepted the surrender of key towns, using both diplomacy and intimidation to bring the realm under his control. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony, meant to mark divine approval, turned tense when shouts outside caused Norman guards to panic, setting fires near the church. It was a fitting image for a kingdom both conquered and uncertain. Crowns amid chaos. Over the next few years, William replaced the Anglo-Saxon elite with Norman lords. Castles rose across the land, symbols of authority and instruments of control. The Old English aristocracy vanished. Their estates were redistributed to Norman knights. The Domesday Book, compiled 2 decades later, would record this total transformation, a new social order carved from conquest. Culturally, the impact was just as profound. Norman French blended with Old English, creating the roots of the language spoken today. Architecture evolved into Romanesque stone, and England's church aligned closely with Rome. Trade routes shifted toward the continent, binding England into the fabric of medieval Europe. Yet the memory of Hastings endured. To later generations, it became both a warning and a beginning. The day England lost its crown and found its destiny. History does not forget. It only waits to be understood. The Battle of Hastings was not just the fall of a king. It was the rebirth of a nation. From the ashes of Harold's defeat rose a New England, shaped by Norman order and Saxon memory. Castles replaced wooden halls, French words entered English speech, and a single crown united 2 worlds under one destiny. Every conquest leaves scars, but some also leave foundations. Hastings did both. It ended one age and began the next. If you believe in truth told through courage and memory, subscribe to Past Frame, where history breathes again.